All right, guys, welcome back. So spent last lecture talking about webinars, what they are, and why they're great for generating leads. So let's talk now about how to create one of your own. The first step is to decide on a webinar topic. Pick something that appeals to your audience so they'll be compelled to sign up. Try to form the idea into a clear and interesting title. Nurses and doctors might like this one, dealing with difficult patients and their families, or how to position yourself for promotion might appeal to people who want a shittier job that pays better. Many webinar topics end up sounding like blog post titles, but okay, since the idea is roughly the same thing, you want to attract people with a cool sounding topic that they're going to be interested in. And if they know it's 60 minutes long, then it can't sound like it's really dry and boring. However, don't be afraid to use your product or platform as the topic for your webinar. Doing a platform demo webinar, for example, is something plenty of businesses do. You just want to make sure the webinar is helpful and don't make it too salesy. For example, User Testing does 2 or 3 webinars a month and mixes up topics, so some weeks they talk about industry events and popular topics, and other weeks they focus on how to use key features of their platform. If you're doing a series of webinars, well, you should consider how your webinar fits in with your full schedule. Try not to repeat topics because you won't get the same people back. Plan out a series of complementary topics over multiple webinars so your attendees will have continued interest in whatever you're doing. So what might your topic be for a webinar? Maybe you'd want to do a webinar on current trends in your industry, or a how-to tutorial for people who use your product or platform. If you're having trouble coming up with ideas, give these tips a shot. Number 1, look at your most popular blog posts or social content. Whatever's getting the most engagement, likes, comments, and shares is probably hitting a nerve for some reason. Adapt that idea for a webinar format and build on what you learned from the earlier post. For example, someone might ask a question on Quora that could answer like, how do I monetize YouTube videos? Well, you could post an answer on Quora, but if your audience would be interested in your answer as well, you can also create a webinar on the same topic and then go into more detail. Also, you can post on Quora and then say, oh, by the way, I did a webinar on it, click here. Number 2 is ask your audience. You could put up a question in a forum, send out an email, or post a survey on your website. Ask people what topics they'd be most interested in hearing more about. You don't even have to say it's for a webinar. Use those responses to plan webinars and any other posts that you want to create. Number 3, research competitor webinars. Who else is putting out webinars that your audience might like? Research your competitors and see what they're doing. Attend one even. See how their webinar is and figure out how to make yours even better. So once you have a topic in mind, you'll need to figure out who will be involved with planning and the execution of said webinar. Someone needs to prepare slides and write up scripts and notes. You don't have to script, but it's generally a good idea. Someone needs to be the main speaker. You might even need a webinar helper as well, like someone to advance slides and answer any tech questions while the webinar is going. And if you plan on featuring a guest speaker, well, you'll need to invite them as well. So who are all these people? If you're the writer and speaker, great. You have less people to try and wrangle. But if there are other people potentially involved, you'll need to contact them, obviously in advance, get them to commit, and put it on their schedule. And then obviously you got to remind them about it coming on and making sure they show up, otherwise it's a problem. The next step is to create an outline. Work through your topic and decide how you can break it up into easy to follow sections. You might decide to work with a speaker to develop it or have them do it themselves. It's actually a really easy thing to do. If you have an audience, you say to an expert, I have an audience, you have information, why don't you teach it to my audience? And it gives you exposure, and it's a great way of keep upping the attention and engagement and retention of my audience. Anyway, regardless of who creates the outline, be aware of how much material you're probably gonna need to be creating. Mini webinars are scheduled to last an hour. They usually have some kind of intro telling people who the speaker is and what the topic is, as well as housekeeping announcements. Things like, this is being recorded. If you have any questions, do this, and whatever. You might also decide to build in time at the end of the hour for questions, maybe 5, maybe 10, maybe even as high as 20 minutes, depending on how many people are there. So in a lot of cases, you'll be responsible for coming up with roughly 40 to 45 minutes of actual presentation content for an hour of webinar. This amount of time is what you need to keep in mind as you write your script. So take your outline and start fleshing it out. Webinars should be as interactive as live in-person presentations are. So make sure you build in places for actual interactions. Just because this is online doesn't mean you need to speak on a headset for 40 minutes straight. Plan to ask questions, get people involved. How they respond will depend on what webinar platform you use, but usually people can do like a text chat reply. They might be able to answer a poll on screen, and other times they might be able to speak on their microphone. As you're writing up the script, you might decide to do a fully written script. You might write something out and want to present it word for word. Now, the big risk here is that if you deliver a script that way, it'll sound like you're reading it off. That might make people lose interest quickly, kind of just depends. Everyone has their own speaking style, but here's what I suggest. Outline the parts you know and script the parts you don't. If you're the expert doing all the speaking, then you might not need any script at all, just a bullet list type outline to follow, especially if you've done this type of presentation before. Just fill in the gaps with what you know and just kind of keep things moving. If there's something you want to ensure gets across perfectly, then type that out. Another word of advice is just practice this more than once. Once you have your notes and scripts and whatever in place, just go through it. It's only an hour. And that way, at least you're not freaking out when you actually have to do it for real. Make sure that you leave in delays for parts where you hope people might ask questions or get involved. Practicing on the actual presentation platform is even better since you'll know where the controls and other features are located, and you really don't want to get lost during the actual live event. Another piece of advice is use time markers to stay on schedule. What I mean is figure out where you need to be after, like, say 15 minutes, and then put a note about it in your script, like type in 15 minutes in big bold letters or something like that. So you know if you're not there in 15 minutes, oh crap, speed it up. If you're going to show slides in your webinar, most webinar platforms are gonna probably be PowerPoint friendly, meaning you should be able to just create the slides in PowerPoint and then import the file right in. If you make them say in like Keynote, well, you'll probably have to export your slides as a PowerPoint format, which I believe you can do. Here's a tip. When designing your slides, just try to keep them as simple as possible. Do not put in transitions, animations, and don't put in embedded video files inside the slides. A video playing through a live stream video to someone watching that video there's too many things that go wrong. Now, while it would be great to include visual pop in your webinar slides, most webinar platforms really suck at making those effects actually work, so try to avoid any unnecessary bells and whistles. Stick with a simple slide design and try to import and test your slides as early as possible so you know what's actually going to work. Now that brings us to the issue of choosing a webinar provider, and well, you've got some free options if you want. Now the first one, surprisingly, is actually just YouTube. On YouTube, you can do a live stream. To do a live stream, just go to youtube.com/live, or it's live_DAS or something like that. And then you can just click on the upload button at the top of YouTube and then select live streaming as the option. YouTube requires that you set up streaming software, but YouTube has some pretty helpful directions to get you through each step. So it's a pretty good free option, especially, considering it's free. Now with YouTube, you can't add a PowerPoint presentation, but you can add these things called cards. You can have up to 5 cards, and each card is kind of like a full screen image that you can show on the screen whenever you want. You can use these cards to share links, but one of the best uses with a webinar is probably actually to just conduct something like a poll. Prep your poll question in advance and show it at the right time to have people answer. They can even see the results. Now, another free option is Google Hangouts. You can conduct your own webinar with up to 100 people watching for free. You can't incorporate slides, unfortunately, but it does have screen sharing. So what you could instead do is just show the slides on your computer through screen sharing. You might have to download and install the Hangouts plugin, but it's generally pretty easy. Just go to hangouts.google.com. Now, if you want access to more features like email invites, which is pretty nice, and especially things like the ability to include presentation slides or have people, like manage people's logins and get information from them, things like that, well, you're probably gonna have to go with a paid option. Now, one really popular option is GoToMeeting, and they have a specific product for this, which is called GoToWebinar. And you can do it free for 7 days if you want. Now, there's a lot of other providers out there. There's AnyMeeting. There's one called Zoom. I think we mentioned this earlier. So if you want to do something bigger, try those out and see what fits your needs best. Honestly, I just try doing the trial and see how it goes. And if you can't live without it, do it. But otherwise, Google Hangouts works pretty well. Now, once you've got your provider and slides and script and everything ready to go, make sure you promote your webinar using the usual channels. Remember, this is a lead magnet, so the other half of this, the portion of this process is getting that page out there to get people to see it to sign up. So you can run ads, you can post it in Facebook and Slack groups or wherever. Make sure when you are highlighting this and promoting it that you make sure people know that it's free. People love free stuff. If your webinar provider, for instance, has built-in email invitations, then you can actually upload a list and then send out invites to your audience already. Do what you can do to get people there. Now, during your webinar, rely on your preparation. If you practice, really you have nothing to worry about. Answer questions, be friendly, and remember why you're putting on this webinar in the first place. You're trying to get leads and to get them interested in you and your business. If any problems arise, obviously just stay cool and be human about it. People generally forgive you. Ultimately, webinars help you make new connections with your audience, so encourage them to stay connected. Let them know to contact you for more information, to follow your channels on social, sign up for your email, visit your website, all the things that can result in more leads and engagement across the board. And if you're keeping your webinars going, tell them when your next webinar will happen before they sign off. If you're looking for inspiration, here's a few webinars worth checking out. Lead Pages has a weekly webinar series and does a great job of promoting it with a pretty nice landing page when you where you sign up. Features a video preview, which I think is a pretty nice touch. Obviously kind of hard to do if you haven't done this before, but if it's your second time at it, it's pretty easy. HubSpot also does a series called Broadcast, and what's nice is that they provide some resources to download as well, like a to-do list that you can apply what you've learned from the presentation, and you can fill it out as you go through. The other one was Training Mag, and they do a bunch of webinars on professional development topics. Usually feature a few speakers in each one. They have a different style, so worth checking them out. You can also just go to YouTube and search for webinar on blank, and then a topic you're interested in. YouTube has tons of webinar recordings so you can check out. You can certainly find whatever topic you want. You want to learn about Airbnb hosting? I did a webinar and it's on YouTube. You can find it. So before you design yours, I recommend looking to see what other people have done. So there's a lot to consider when planning and executing webinars, but they can be a lot of fun because of all the people that can get involved. Try one out, see how it works for you. Make sure you prep and rehearse before you go live. Try a free solution like YouTube streaming and see if you can get it to work. Otherwise, upgrade and pay a little bit more for go to webinar. And don't forget to attend webinars of your own to get an idea of how these work. Okay guys, that is it. Good luck. I will see you in the next lecture.